device arranged by the Creator God to satisfy divine justice. That framing only makes sense if the Creator God is the highest reality. But if the demiurge is a lesser, ignorant being, then Jesus arrives as something else entirely. He arrives as a time's messenger from beyond the system asterisk, an emissary of the Pleroma, sent not to appease a god but to time's wake up, time's the divine sparks trapped inside human beings who have forgotten what they are. The Gnostic word for this knowledge is time's gnosis asterisk, not belief, not faith in propositions, direct, experiential, interior knowing, the kind that doesn't come from outside you, it erupts from inside. Like remembering something you always knew but had been made to forget. Think about the last time you had a moment of sudden clarity. Not something you reasoned your way to, something that arrived whole. A recognition rather than a discovery. The Gnostics would say you just brushed up against your own divine spark. The Gnostic Jesus taught in parables within parables. On the surface, a story about seeds and soil. Underneath, a precise map of consciousness. The outer teaching was for everyone, but nested inside it was another layer meant only for those whose inner spark had awakened enough to receive it. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the most extraordinary documents to survive from this tradition, opens with a statement that should stop you cold. Asterisk. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. Asterisk. Not belief, not obedience. Asterisk. Understanding. Asterisk. Interior transformation through the direct encounter with living knowledge. This is not the Jesus who asks you to trust and comply. This is the Jesus who says, asterisk, you have what you need inside. You already stop looking at me and start looking where I'm pointing. Asterisk. But the rabbit hole goes deeper, because the question you're probably sitting with now is, if this tradition was so rich, so precise, so internally coherent, why did it almost disappear? The answer to that question is one of the most consequential stories in all of Western history, and most people have never heard it told honestly. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, there were dozens of Gnostic schools. The Valentinians, the Sethians, the Ophites, each with their own maps of the divine realms, their own understanding of how the Pleroma related to the material world, their own reading of what Jesus actually came to transmit. These were not fringe cults. Valentinus, perhaps the most sophisticated Gnostic theologian of the ancient world, nearly became the Bishop of Rome. Let that land for a moment. The man who taught that salvation was interior illumination, that the material world was the product of a lesser being's error, that each human carried uncreated divine light, this man nearly led what would become the Roman Catholic Church. He didn't, and the tradition that won the institutional contest moved in a very specific direction: external authority, creedal conformity, salvation mediated through the Church rather than through direct interior experience. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE was not just a theological meeting. It was the moment the winning version of Christianity locked its borders and began defining everything outside those borders as heresy. Texts were destroyed, communities were disbanded, and the extraordinary library of Gnostic thought was scattered to the margins of history, surviving in fragments, in quotations from hostile sources, in a few manuscripts hidden in caves, and rediscovered almost by accident. I actually remember the first time I held a translation of the full Nag Hammadi library in my hands, a complete scholarly edition, hefty enough to use as a doorstop. I'd ordered it after a conversation with a researcher who told me, half seriously, that reading it would make Orthodox Christianity feel like a children's picture book of something much older and stranger. He wasn't wrong. What struck me wasn't the strangeness of the cosmology. It was how human times, it all felt. How earnest. These were people wrestling with the same fundamental vertigo that you feel when you sit quietly enough and ask, asterisk, what actually is this? What am I? Why does it feel like there should be more? Asterisk. And here's what the Gnostic tradition answers, in the voice of its Jesus, across dozens of recovered texts. You are not primarily a body that occasionally has spiritual experiences. You are a fragment of divine light that is times currently wearing, times a body navigating a world built by a lesser power, under systems of thought designed to make you forget your origin. The suffering you feel is not punishment, it's dissonance. The dissonance between what you fundamentally are and the conditions of the world you're moving through. The path, in Gnostic terms, is not worship. It's times anagnoresis, times the ancient Greek word for the moment in a drama when a character finally recognizes who they truly are. The lost child realizing they are royalty. The amnesiac suddenly remembering their whole life. That moment, applied to consciousness itself. Think about what that means for your spiritual life right now. Every tradition you've engaged with, every meditation practice, every moment of inexplicable peace or uncaused joy, the Gnostic framework says, those weren't you reaching times towards something outside you. Those were moments when the noise quieted enough for your own inner light to become briefly visible to itself. The spark, recognizing itself. Now, does this mean the Gnostics had everything right? Probably not. These were human beings working with extraordinary insight under brutal historical pressure. Some of the cosmological systems they built with their dozens of divine emanations, their elaborate maps of the realms between here and the Pleroma, can feel like they're building scaffolding around a window, rather than just opening the window. As I covered in my video on the Forbidden Metaphysics series, there's a tension in every esoteric tradition between the living transmission and the system built to carry it. And sometimes, the system becomes the obstacle. But underneath all of that scaffolding is something that I believe deserves your full attention. A Jesus who didn't come to manage your guilt. A Jesus who came to remind you of something you actually are. A cosmology that takes the darkness of the world seriously without concluding that darkness is the final word. A tradition that places the locus of the sacred not in an institution, not in a creed, but inside the living awareness. Reading these words right now, you've carried that feeling your entire life. The sense that the official story was missing something, that the version of the divine you were handed was too small for what you actually experienced in your most honest moments. The Gnostics had a name for what you felt. They called it remembering. And maybe that's exactly what you've been doing all along, not searching for something new, but slowly, stubbornly, refusing to forget what you already know. If this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting. I understood it.